1. So about 5 years ago, I, male 26, set out to travel the world. Being straight out of college had left me in debt, ever more desperate for any job I was overqualified for, and generally depressed. I felt isolated and alone in my small town in Washington, and found the only way to get out: travel. My high school buddy suggested I look into woofing and volunteering as a way to travel cheap, and so I did. The way it works is quite simple. You work for around 25 hours a week on some farm for food and housing. The draw is that since the community of cheap-ass travelers is quite big, it is a great way to meet new people. Get outside of your comfort zone and just let yourself live and figure it out. Fast forward 8 months, and I'm a seasoned cowshit shoveler. Moo. I started out in Washington, Oregon, and went south to Carolina. There I was able to save some money. I was paid under the table for some extra work, and was now faced with a decision: where to go in the world. The excitement of being able to purchase a ticket to almost anywhere in the world got the best of me. And on the advice of my dumbass hippie volunteering partner, I chose it at random. I went to a randomizer website and clicked the country button: Georgia, the country of Georgia. To say I didn't know anything about it was an understatement. But the fear of the unknown made it exciting and exotic somehow, so I did it. I purchased a ticket and started browsing for a farm that could host me. There were a few options, and most were remote and hadn't even an internet connection. I messaged every single one, because few ever respond, and got a response from one farm on top of a mountain. The picture showed a traditional Georgian stone house with a large garden out in the back. A family with several cheerful children, grandparents having dinner, animals. It seemed warm and inviting. The description was written in good English, and the requirements for work seemed reasonable. I was excited. After I flew into Tbilisi, the capital, I followed the directions that they have sent to locate the farm, which wasn't an easy task. Few in Georgia speak English. The roads are fucked since few have been maintained since the fall of the Soviet Union, and the country is generally poor. It took me around 20 hours of Soviet buses and taxis, weird serpentine roads and paths, to get to that desired blue pin on my map. It was a dirt path leading up a steep hill into a national park up in the north of the country. There was nothing for miles on end but trees and their silence. As I got up that hill, I saw the houses about half a mile away on an even steeper hill, surrounded by the trees. From that viewpoint, it seemed abandoned, overgrown, brown, and dreary. As I walked past the gate, Giri, the apparent owner, approached me. He was a heavy, middle-aged guy with a big smile on his face. He shook my hand and in broken English started to show me around. He also smelled of booze. As he was showing me around, I noticed that there wasn't anyone there but us. I asked about his wife and kids, and he brushed that aside and said something to the extent of, "They're away right now." By this point, I'm creeped out. From browsing around, it was apparent that the farm was in deep decline. Apple trees and crops were dying. The roof of the small barn caved in, the house itself full of trash and smelling of mold. It was obvious that Giri was going through a rough patch. But I wasn't going to turn around and just leave in the middle of nowhere without a plan, having not slept for the past 36 hours. It was evening, and after feeding me well and trying as best he could to hold a conversation in English, Giri showed me my room on the second floor, and I went to sleep. I almost immediately blacked out from the exhaustion and stress, and would have slept for 10 hours if I wasn't awoken by a strange noise in the middle of the night. It sounded like something metallic and heavy was being dragged across the wooden floor. In that sleepy in-between state, I listened to it for a few minutes, thought nothing of it, and went back to sleep once it stopped. In the morning, Giri, now sober and grumpy, asked me to repair some of the windows and doors in the house, as he himself planned to go and fetch some components in a nearby village. Again, I got this weird feeling creeping down my spine. Something wasn't right. He didn't maintain eye contact and was evasive. There was no cell reception, no internet. Once he left, I checked around the house to get a general idea of the place, and it became apparent that the place was hardly ever lived in, like one of those abandoned houses. There was broken furniture, newspapers, and old photos on the floor, a shattered mirror. I took my phone and looked through the saved listing again. The photos didn't match neither the backyard, the garden, or the walls. Geary wasn't in any of them. It was a completely different house. Now by this point I am full-blown panicking. I pack my shit and start to leave when I see a group of 3 men going up that first hill. There aren't any other paths I can take, so I go behind the house and rush down this hill into the forest. After some time, I stop and listen. I hear them in the house. They're clearly looking for me. Afraid of making any noise, I remain still, hidden behind a bush. I don't know how long I wait, but they were persistent. At some point, I hear them leave, so I count until some large number and proceed back into the house and path. And once it's all clear, I book the hell out of there. Never ran this fast, but I'm still in the middle of nowhere, no traffic, no public transport. I reach a paved road and start walking in the general direction from where I remember coming. Hours go by and finally a car drives by and stops. Now in a horror movie, this would have been Geary and his friends, but this was actually a really nice Russian family that gave me a ride to town. The listing disappeared from the website in a few days after I left, and I haven't heard from Geary since. I've yet to make sense of that experience. I have traveled since and volunteered too. Some people, once they hear this story, laugh and say that the guy was coming over with a couple of friends from the village to have a chat over a few beers. Some say he was bound to kidnap and kill me. But I trust my gut feeling. Something was really not right. So let's never meet again, Geary. 2. Hi. For the record, I'm female. I'm turning 19 this year, and the story happened when I was 15. Oh, and also I'm from France, which can explain my English mistakes if there are any. When I was 15 years old and just got into junior year, I created my first Twitter account that I deleted because of this story, some information. I didn't tell anyone my username, neither my family nor my friends, because I didn't have any. My profile picture was an avatar, so no pictures of me on the account, and as location I said Paris because I lived in the suburbs. I didn't have many followers, 20 or maybe 30, and I didn't follow that many people, so my timeline was not really interesting. One evening in October, someone sent me a quite strange direct message. It was a 200-follower account, and the message was, "Hi, my name is Rob. I just turned 17 and wanted to know if you lived in," and he gave us the town I lived in, "because I will soon move and go to the town high school, and I'm looking for friends." I immediately thought something was wrong because there was nowhere in my profile I said where I actually lived. But after some time thinking, I remembered a tweet I made weeks ago about buses, and I mentioned the city. So I told myself he just looked up the town and found my tweet. His age wasn't shocking because I'm 2 years ahead of my classmates. I was bored and he was polite. I answered him. I told him I did indeed live there and go to high school there. The discussion was natural and we talked a lot that night, mainly about high school, about the food at the cafeteria, about the teachers, that kind of thing. But as it was getting very late, he tried to interpose some personal questions like, "Do you live far away from the school? In a house or an apartment? Do you live with both your parents? There's 5 of you. You're not often home alone, right?" I never answered because it was way too shady for me, and unfortunately he didn't insist. Unfortunately, because if he did, I would probably have blocked him. The next day, same thing. We talked a lot, and he was still asking personal questions to know me better, so I asked some too. And he always answered with what seemed like honesty. I still didn't answer the questions about my house, though, because he didn't need to know anything. It lasted for 2 or 3 weeks, but it was enough for me to develop feelings for him. He was handsome, super kind, and it was everything I needed because I was bullied for years. And even today, I still develop strong feelings, but most importantly, blind trust in people who are friendly to me. In France, in October, we have a 2-week-long vacation, and the day before back-to-school day, he finally told me he was coming to my high school, because he finally moved in with his mom, and he asked for a place to meet during the morning break. I was so happy and relieved to be able to meet him, and told him to join me in the hall. But when he understood that there would be people around, he said he would prefer an isolated place, because he was afraid he would not recognize me, and he didn't want to spend the break looking for me. It was a good excuse for me, so I told him to meet me in the 3rd-floor bathroom, because we weren't allowed to stay there during the breaks, and no one would disturb us. In my head, even though it was a little bit creepy, I was still in the school, so nothing could happen to me. Next day, back to school day. I made myself pretty, I wore my best clothes. I counted down the minutes, and finally, when break time arrived, I ran to the bathroom and waited. And when he arrived, it was him. He was not a catfish, he looked quite like his profile picture. But I still noticed that he seemed a little bit older than he told me. I thought 20 years old instead of 17. We talked a lot, we got along well, I was so pleased. And at the end of the break, he asked me to go to the fast food with him for lunch. I said no, because I didn't have any money, and I always refuse for people to pay for me. It's a principle. He seemed disappointed, but offered to walk me home after classes. I explained I have to take the bus, but that he could walk me to the bus stop. He looked disappointed, again, but finally accepted. And that's exactly what happened, and it was so great that it quickly became some kind of routine. We met in the 3rd-floor bathroom during the morning break, and he walked me to the bus stop after classes. Surprising fact, I never saw him in the hallways nor the cafeteria, but I thought at the time that the building was huge and that there were over 1,500 students in there. So if our schedules didn't coincide, there was no way we could meet each other. This little game lasted until December, so almost a month and a half. The 14th of December, a Thursday, I complained about how lonely I was going to be that evening, because my dad was abroad for work, my brother was always at his friend's house, my little sis was on a school trip, and my mom had to work late that very night. It was very reckless of me, but after weeks I thought I could trust him. That evening he walked me to the bus stop. We both waited. I got on the bus, waved at him, and put on my earphones. I had 2 stops before my house. It was about 17:45 in December, so it was really dark outside. As I got out of the bus, I had a really bad feeling. There was that very uncomfortable sensation in my stomach, and I felt like I was being observed. I pressed pause on my music, but kept my earphones on so that people thought I couldn't hear anything, and that's probably what saved my life. I lived in a suburban neighborhood, very silent, especially at night, with no visibility on the big road the bus passed in. When I heard footsteps behind me, I understood I was right. There was someone following me, and he was not well-intentioned. At least I could hear that he was not accelerating, so that he was not trying to catch me up. But I couldn't guess how long it would last. As quietly as possible, I tried to reach for my keys in my pocket, and when I finally pulled them out, I ran as fast as I could. The best sprint of my life. I don't know how it worked, but I managed to open and to close the door before he could reach me. I then deactivated my alarm, which, by the way, confirmed that I was home alone, and took a look through the glass panel on the door. It is not a peephole. It is a whole window, so if someone wants to see what's happening inside, they can. It was Rob, a few meters away, looking at me with a really creepy face. He followed me to my home, probably with a car, and he was clearly not here for chit-chat. I still don't know why I didn't call the police. I was totally paralyzed. We both stared at each other for a minute, and when I took back control over my body, I ran in the kitchen to get a knife and got back to the door. He was there too, banging against the door. I feared for a second that the glass would break, but it didn't happen. That moment, when I was pushing against the door, praying for it not to break, while he was kicking harder and harder, was the longest I've ever experienced. After maybe 5 minutes, he stopped and got around the house, knocking against every shutter, and went back to the door. He looked very angry, but then my neighbor's car reached my house. and Rob ran away, probably thinking it was my mom coming home. On Twitter, Rob sent me 1,000 messages before I could block him. He then deleted his account, and I thought I was done with this story. But quickly after, some accounts which have just been created followed me. Their @s were all a series of numbers and the first letter of his name. And as soon as I blocked one, another one followed me. I chose to delete my account, because I couldn't make it stop. And it was too hard to endure because they were sending me dozens of insulting DMs. Later I talked to people who were supposed to be Rob's classmates, because I haven't met him again in days. But not a single one ever heard of Rob. This guy was never a student at my high school. That is why I'd never met him apart from our daily meetings. And that is probably why he seemed so old. I never heard a thing about him anymore, and I'm still asking myself, what did he want, and what could have happened that night? So Rob, let's never meet again. 3. To begin, this happened about 28 years ago. Gosh, I'm getting old. But on to the story. To begin, my mom was very, very strict my entire life. She had a school-type clock in the kitchen, the big round one with that big red second hand. And if that second hand was past the 12 on your time limit, that was a month punishment and a possible whipping. She herself would time how long it would take to get from point A to point B. As an example, she knew exactly how long it took to get from middle school to the front door, approximately 10 minutes. This was pretty much done so I could be verified home in time to leave shortly after to pick my younger sister up from elementary school. My mom worked first shift and my dad second. He had to leave for work right when I got home from school, knowing that I would pick up my sister. What he would do if I hadn't gotten home on time was rush out the door, pick up my 5-year-old sister from school, take her to work with him, and pass her off to my mom an hour later when she was done at work. They worked at the same place. Now, this story takes place my freshman year of high school. My time limit was about 40 minutes pushing it. Now, my high school was about 5 miles away from my house, so after school, there were city buses waiting in front of the school for 5 minutes after the bell rang. Then they would all be on their way. If you missed your bus, you either walked or paid for the next bus, or waited the mandatory hour for the next free bus. The free city bus went with the bus passes our school gave us, but went by the hour, except for mornings, that was for all morning. Here's a layout of my high school, 3 floors, not including the basement where the gym classes and pool were. There was also a tower 1 level above the 3rd level. My homeroom was on the top level, therefore my locker was on the 3rd floor, opposite side where the buses picked you up. My last class for the day was, you guessed it, swim class in the basement. You were not allowed to have a jacket or backpack carried around with you at all during the school day. Had to go to your locker in between every class. Since I live in the northern states, it's cold and snowing most of the school year. I bet you guess where this is headed. Yep, missed that damn bus 85% of the time. I wasn't allowed to have money, so my options were either wait for the next bus, automatic punishment, or try my hardest to walk and run till I made it home through the cold and snow, and hope I made it in time to avoid punishment. To my mom, there are no excuses, no reason to be late. And to be honest, I was probably grounded 70% of the school year because of this. Now on to the story, so you understand my mindset here. Yet another day of missing the bus, 1 day away from being off punishment. I contemplated on trying to walk and run home, but due to the weather I knew I wouldn't make it. So off to the bus stop I went to wait my hour. I stood up and waited there for about 15 minutes and an SUV pulls up. The guy in the SUV asked if I needed a ride. I'm thinking yes, to avoid punishment because I'll make it home on time. Also, I thought this was someone I knew, that I went to school with. He didn't look directly at me when he pulled up, kept his face kind of forward, but yes, he was talking to me. I was the only one there. So I said, yeah, thanks, that would be great. I only live a few miles away. He said, sure, hop in, and slid over and popped the door open for me. So I got in, really thankful, and he asked where I live. I start to give him directions, and start noticing that this is not the person I thought it was. He turns and looks at me to ask where, and this guy is about 40-something years old. Definitely not who I thought it was. I immediately get nervous and start giving him directions. Figured I'll tell him another block and hop a couple of fences. I was a huge tomboy, so fences were an everyday thing, and this guy won't know where I live, and I would still make it home on time. So we're driving for a little bit, and he's following all my directions, so I assume this will be okay. That is, until I tell him another block up and take a left. Well, that didn't happen. He took a left, but onto a dead-end street that pretty much had shut down, with abandoned factories. In other words, no people. I immediately start panicking inside, told him he turned in the wrong street, do a U-turn, but he's not listening. So I'm freaking out more now, and at this point I'm about a mile away from my house. I yelled at him to stop, to turn around. It's not the turn I told him. Still nothing, no response. I yelled at him to stop the truck, I'll just get the rest of the way myself. Still nothing. He pulls over, grabs me. Now I'm beyond scared, crying, freaking the hell out, wondering what I put myself in. This guy did not care. He was grabbing me tightly. He told me after I do what he wants, then he'll take me home. I told him through tears I'm not doing anything. I want to go home. He says no, and released one hand to grab at my pants zipper. And in that instant, fight or flight kicked in, and being a combo of both, I started hitting him, pushing him, whatever I could. I got the door open and fell out, got up as he was yelling at me to come back into his truck and getting out of the driver's side to run over by me. I got up and ran through yards, hopped fences, and kept looking behind me to make sure I didn't see him. I eventually made it home, late, of course. My mom got home a few hours later and I was grounded. I tried telling her what happened, but she wasn't having it, no excuses. She didn't believe me. Thought I was making it all up so I wouldn't get an extension on my punishment. I cried myself to sleep that night, went to school the next day, trying not to think about the previous day, in order to get through. When school was over, I skipped swim class to make sure I made that bus. So I'm going out to the bus, and what do I see? The brown SUV. But it can't be. Gotta be someone picking up their kid or something. No, it was the same guy from the day before. He was there and he spotted me before I spotted him, so he's watching me. And I figured, well, I'm safe, I'm on the bus. This bus is only for students, so he can't get me here. I got off my bus at my stop to wait for the second bus, and there he was. Pulled up to me again and said, "Come here." I started running again. Wasn't so far from my house. I yelled at him that I'm only 15, I'm not going with him, not doing anything with him, I'm not that type of person. His response was that I know you're young, and that's exactly why I want you. I ran, hopped more fences. But he's getting better at finding where I'm at, even though he's driving. I hid in a yard a block away from my house for a bit, made it home late again, longer punishment. Mom didn't believe me. Next day, it's morning. Walking to the bus stop about a couple of blocks away from my house at this time. I spot the brown SUV waiting again, morning this time. I ran through yards, through whatever, through snow, falling, freezing, crying, made it to school late. Went to the counselor and talked to her. She called my mom. My mom told her I was making up stories because I didn't want to get in trouble, so nothing was done. I skipped swim class again and ran to that bus. Brown SUV in tow, changed up my stop, didn't matter, there he was. This time he ended up in front of me. Pulled his hands up with a wad of money, told me he would give it all to me if I would just get in. I ran. Late home again, getting in more and more trouble, and kept making excuses for being late. Next day I told a friend of mine whose brother happened to be in a gang. He listened, he believed me. Told me he would get me a gun, and he came through. I had a .357 with me for a few days. Those just so happened to be the days the guy didn't show up. Wasn't at school, didn't see him. And my friend told me his brother found out he took his gun and needed it back right away, so there that went. Probably good that happened, come to think of it now. But then the guy was back again, in the mornings now, waiting. After school, waiting. Grabbed me and tried pulling me into his truck once more. Got away then too. I just stopped going to school. Hid in the basement or attic all day. Told my best friend from middle school what was going on. She told me to go to school with her, which was about 2 miles away from my house, so I met her one day, went into her school, talked to her counselor. Her counselor called my school, who only verified that I hadn't been going to school lately. She then called my mom, who finally listened. Said if I was going through all this trouble, then maybe it is true. When she got home from work, she took me to MPD, and we waited and waited. They did a lot of talking to each other, kinda ignored us standing there waiting. I sat on a bench, and after an hour or so, I fell asleep. While my mom kept telling them she needed to talk to someone, and they kept telling her to hold on. Eventually, an officer came out, woke me up, and told my mom to just go home, and they'll send someone over. Now, my mom's more angry than me, but we agree to go home. My mom gives me a big hug and says she's sorry, and to go lay down and she'll wake me up when they get here. She stayed up all night. They never came. She called again and again. Nothing. No help. We'll send someone. No one. They never even did paperwork or anything on it. My mom ended up transferring my school to be closer to home and have friends to walk with. I still saw this guy for years, following, watching, holding his hand up full of money, waving for me to come over. This decreased after time, and there was a long while I hadn't seen him, figuring he was locked up or something, and that he would be there again. And yes, he figured out I switched schools, but I was never alone anymore. Years passed, and I just stopped seeing him. I think the actual last time I did see him, I was by my boyfriend at the time's house. And this guy was picking up a prostitute, and I was hiding behind a power line pole because I was on my way to the corner store to get something for my now ex-boyfriend. I told him when I got back because I didn't go to the store. When the guy drove away, I ran back to my ex's house crying and scared. He thought it was funny. Yeah, like I said, ex-boyfriend. I don't know why I did everything the way I did. I didn't think anyone would believe me, and in the beginning, I was proven right. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 518. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use and sent in stories for use in this video. If you have a story of your own you'd like to send in, be it for this series or any of the others I do, or just something you want to send in to see if I'll find a place for it, please do send it along to kingofthecities@gmail.com. That really is the best way to get stories to me, as I do check the email quite frequently. Okay, I'm going to end things there because I've got lots and lots of editing ahead of me. Another one of those weeks where I do the recording early in the week. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.